right. Hey, my name is Mike Teague, and like the governor said, I'm the Secretary of both Energy and Environment. She made the decision 2 years ago to combine Energy and Environment. Cabinet secretaries, as Mike Ming went to GE, Gary Scherer was Secretary of Environment and stayed on campus at OSU, and so we started just a little bit over 2 years ago. Energy and water together is a topic that not only is critically important to our state, but it's important to me personally. So before last May, we were at the end of about a 4-year drought. We had lakes in Oklahoma that were at 12% of their capacity. Okay? We were blessed for the most part, unless you were impacted by the flooding, but in May we got 28 inches of rain in the state in the month of May. June didn't slow up much more. We filled every single lake in the state of Oklahoma. Everybody's doing a happy dance, ding dong, the witch is dead and the drought's over. Except this is Oklahoma. The drought is never over. Water is always important, and we are never going to have enough of it. So we've got to be better and smarter about using the water that we have, whether it's conservation or making beneficial use of all of our water resources, which we're going to talk about today. I'm also pretty passionate about combining energy and environment, and I even got them sitting in the right order, energy and environment, and that's alphabetical, not prejudice. We really do have a good panel today. So let me introduce the two speakers. Dr. Paula Gant is here. She's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Oil and Natural Gas in the Office of Fossil Fuel at the U.S. Department of Energy. Dr. Gant administers domestic and international oil and gas programs, including policy analysis and liquefied natural gas import and export authorization. Her work is focused on realizing the promise presented by America's abundant natural gas and oil resources, which hinges on prudent production, environmental stewardship, and efficient use. She received a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from McNeese State University and a PhD in economics from Auburn University, and we're not supposed to ask football questions. And I went to Norwich, and I'm not even sure we still have a football team, so that's easy. Dr. Grevatt, Peter Grevatt is here from the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water at the U.S. EPA. The Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water, in collaboration with states, tribes, and many stakeholders, is responsible for safeguarding America's drinking water. He's responsible for the development and implementation of national drinking water standards, oversight and funding of state drinking water programs, and the implementation of source water protection and underground injection control programs to protect public health nationwide. Prior to joining in his current position, he served as the director of the Office of Children's Health Protection and served as a senior advisor to the EPA's Administrator for Children's Environmental Health. He received his master and doctorate degrees in basic medical sciences from New York University Medical Center and his bachelor's degree in biology from Earlham College. So please welcome our panel.
Thank you, Secretary Teague, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here in Oklahoma City today. It sure is beautiful out there. And fall's coming to DC, but it looks like things are still rather green and lovely here, so it's great to be in Oklahoma, and it's great to see so many familiar and smiling faces in the audience. And it's great to have a chance to talk about where energy and water mix and meet, and particularly given that we're seeing IOGCC and GWPC all mixing here as well today in this historic meeting. It's really important to see this level of collaboration addressing the really important and timely issues facing the nation, and there aren't many as complicated and important to our future as the nexus between energy and water use in this country. This is a very, very challenging set of issues with a great deal of visibility. As Governor Fallin said, energy underpins our quality of life, and water is certainly a part of enabling our quality of life too. And increasingly we're seeing the integration of our understanding of how one of those depends on the other, and will impact certainly the standards of living for our children and for decades to come. So the decisions that we're making today and the work that you're doing here and the issues that you're dealing with are absolutely vital to that. And it's going to take all of us leaning in, and across disciplines, across state agencies, across industries, and particularly excited about the type of work that's been done here in Oklahoma in this regard. And Secretary Teague, you've been a leading part of this, looking at the issues around water across state agencies and reaching out to industry. It's really going to take, like has been done on induced seismicity here in Oklahoma, that same approach is going to be necessary on these water issues because they're all very integrated. We're also very appreciative of the work done by the 30-plus members of the states that are here today, as well as, I understand, partners in Canada, north of the border, that do such an incredibly important job and are so successful in overseeing oil and gas production in the country. That's certainly a vital part of securing our economic and energy future going forward. At the Department of Energy and in the office I manage, we are doing our best to support your efforts. And we're focused on producing decision-ready science that you can use in executing the responsibilities that you have and formulating policy and taking regulatory actions that allow you to convey to your public that you have the confidence that we're taking the right steps and implementing the right practices to ensure that not only do we get the most out of our domestic oil and gas resources, but we do that in a way that safeguards our air, land, water, and local communities. So very much look forward to hearing from you, and we have several of our staff here from DOE over the next day or so about where we're doing that well and where you'd like to see more information coming from our office. But it's certainly an exciting time for our office, for your agencies, and for the country. Let's see if I can figure out how to use this. So I was told if I push the button, it would advance. There we go. Okay. So these are exciting times. We're living in an age of incredible abundance of domestic oil and gas. This slide shows not only do we have abundant resources, but they're very well distributed across the country and varied basins. And as you all know, they map very well with our existing infrastructure. Not only do we have a robust resource, we have the infrastructure we need to deliver it where we need it and turn it into economic value and energy security. And this is a sea change as a result of supply. We've seen our domestic oil and gas resources increase quite dramatically just in the past decade, as is illustrated here on this slide. It presents incredible abundance, whether it's for our economic activity and economic value or for our energy security and our standing in the world. And it's important that in order to realize this promise, that we also address the challenges that come along with this increased activity. And like the challenges that you're discussing here this week at the intersection of energy and water. So to make sure that we're doing our part at the federal level, in 2011, President Obama issued his Blueprint for a Secure Energy Future, which pointed to the vital role that these domestic oil and gas resources play in meeting our energy needs and will for decades to come, and as well as helping reduce our dependence on imported energy. And it pointed to the need to make sure at the federal level we're conducting a science program that ensures that we're getting this right. So he directed EPA and the Department of Energy and the Department of Interior to develop a coordinated research plan to address the impacts of unconventional oil and gas development. And what's shown on this slide are the 7 focus areas for the strategy that was released 2 summers ago, that pointed to the areas where we're focusing our collaborative efforts at the federal level. And the areas highlighted in green are the ones that are particularly focused on water. Our strategy is online. It shows you the specific research projects that we're engaged in across the 3 agencies, and there's ongoing technical collaboration to share those results. And we do our best to share them with you as well. But also importantly, what this strategy allowed us to do, and convening this group over an 18-month period to come up with the strategy, is it allowed us a means to communicate to the public that not only are the risks associated with unconventional oil and gas development relatively known, but they are also relatively bounded, that this is not incredibly unknown territory, and there aren't a lot of variables that haven't been identified. This is important because this visual helps us understand where we should be focusing our attention from our perspective, we think. These are the key risks, and it allows us to focus the conversation on what the science tells us about the nature of these risks, the technologies and practices available to mitigate those risks, and where we need to do more. And that's important for us as we continue to direct our research program, and we hope it's also useful to you as, again, you communicate to the public on where we need to be focusing our attention. So not only do we mitigate these risks, but we maximize the potential of this resource and what it contributes to our economy and to our energy security. In this regard, a particular area that the Secretary has had us focus on is the intersection of water and energy. And we have, the Secretary over the past, I guess 6 months or so, has convened a series of roundtables looking to bring together experts from across research areas, across industries, state and federal stakeholders to talk about the intersection of energy and water. And Secretary Teague was part of that kickoff back in Washington, D.C. in the fall, and it will be wrapping up here in the next month with a capstone event in Washington, D.C. The purpose of that Secretary Moniz convene these conversations is to focus other people like you're doing here today on the intersection of water and energy, but also to inform our research program so we can figure out where we can be working across this area that will provide most benefit to you out here in the States. Examples of the priority areas we're focusing on are increasing water efficiency, identifying substitutes for water and energy processes, and expanding water resources through improvements in water treatment. Can someone advance it? Thank you. So within our work at DOE, and specifically as part of the multi-agency process that we work through with EPA and the Department of Interior, we are focusing, this slide points to some of the areas that we're focusing on. One of the areas that we spend a lot of time on is wellbore integrity. And if you're spending time on wellbore integrity, you're spending a lot of time on cement. As an economist, I'm stunned at how much time I've spent on cement over the past couple of years. But there's certainly a lot of work going on within our national labs and across industry to improve our understanding about how cements perform at depth and pressure and over time. And that's absolutely a vital part of understanding how we're going to protect water resources, not only in the short term, but very much over the long term. Also, as part of the cross-cutting initiative that the Secretary has started, we're focusing the particular aspect of the current roundtables on looking for ways to provide for beneficial uses of produced water specific to oil and gas operations. This is a particularly keen area of interest on the part of the Secretary and something that we're looking forward to hearing from many of you about and hearing what the current practices are. Also, a third area that we're focused on is increasing the availability of data about water use and disposal. And fortunately, we're in a place of being able to leverage the risk-based data management system that has been developed over a number of years, and children of RBDMS like Frac Focus. We're very, very appreciative of the work that's done at the state level and our partnership with many of you here in this room that has allowed RBDMS to become a very, very useful tool in securing the public confidence by providing for a great deal of transparency in access to data. We're also very excited about the partnership that with the Energy Information Administration to create the new national gateway, which will provide a consolidated tool at the national level to access the data that you have available at the state level on a well-by-well basis, and we're very much excited about that. From DOE, we have here Meg Coleman, Shirley Neff, and Nancy Johnson who can answer questions about that, but mostly we're just super excited about it and appreciative of the collaboration that we've had there. Can we advance, please? Thank you. Also an area for our focus of our research and very closely integrated with our research on water are our ongoing efforts to better understand and mitigate the relationship between produced water injection and increased seismicity. This is an area where there's certainly a need for more data so that we can, and an analysis of that data, so we can connect these events to specific operational practices and parameters and geologic conditions, and use that to develop and assess possible mitigation options for decision makers. And I know many of you are in this room, are spending time on this. I know Secretary Teague and his staff have spent a lot of time on this. Some particular areas that we are focusing on at the department and through our national lab in Pittsburgh and Morgantown, the National Energy Technology Lab, are one, a collaborative research effort between the state of Oklahoma, the University of Oklahoma, and the Oklahoma oil and gas operators in the central part of the state that's combining field measurements and modeling to refine techniques for induced seismicity diagnosis and mitigation. Also at Sandia National Labs, where there is a team working at the forefront of a new sensing technology that uses rotational seismometers so that you get a great deal of depth and a dimension for downhole monitoring. These efforts collectively, along with much that you're doing, are going to help us answer questions like how far away, laterally and vertically, from an injection well might you see an induced seismic event? And is an induced seismic event likely under a given scenario? And we're able to use our supercomputers and models. I love to be able to say the word supercomputer because I get to talk about national labs, to model these types of events. So we're doing quite a bit of work at the federal level and across the national labs, but as you know, there's quite a bit going on at the state level as well as at industry. This slide just demonstrates the tremendous, not just volume of water used in hydraulic fracturing, but also how that varies across the country. And as we see operators across the country looking for ways to reduce water use in hydraulic fracturing or come up with alternatives to water or get to, some of the companies in this room in certain areas have goals of a net zero sort of approach to water use this decade. We're seeing some incredible successes, but we're also seeing this variety played out in the solutions that are being applied to either using produced water or reducing water use and substituting water with something else. That not only does it vary from basin to basin like water use does, but even across basins, the solutions vary. So what that suggests to us is it's really important to find ways to convene conversations and lesson learned across operators, across regulators, across different groups of people so that we can leapfrog the learnings that are happening out there and greatly accelerate them. Can you advance, please? Thank you. So I'd just like to close by, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here, but by saying there are few opportunities that we're presented with when we have an incredible abundance, as well as the time and the opportunity, the technical know-how, the human innovation to make sure that we realize that full promise presented by that abundance. And that's the time for the country is now. And it's because of people like you in this room that we're at this moment in history. And it's also because of people like you and you that I'm really confident that we're going to maximize that potential. I'm incredibly excited and pleased to be a small part of that. And on behalf of the rest of the people in the country, I say thank you for what you do, because it certainly makes my job fun, but it's also making this an incredible moment for the country in the course of our history. There is no place in the globe that I go to meet with other governments that the first thing out of their mouths isn't, is this resource real? How did you do it? And how can we do it too? And that's an incredibly exciting message to deliver on behalf of the country. So thank you for being a part of that, and thank you for this opportunity.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a delight to be with you here today. Secretary, thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this panel. And let me say, I think I'm probably not the only one in the audience who has the feeling that we're really tremendously fortunate that Secretary Teague is in the job that he's in today. The national leadership, not only leadership in the state of Oklahoma, but the national leadership that he's been providing on issues about energy, environment, making sure that they work seamlessly together, focused on issues ranging from, of course, induced seismicity, hydrofracking, water quality, in so many ways, I think really the vision you brought to your job has been great for us to learn from. So I'm tremendously appreciative for the work that you do. And Deputy Assistant Secretary Gant, it's been great to have all the opportunities to work together with you on the research effort that we've been participating in, then also with your colleagues at DOE across so many parts of the organization, working on things like the Class 6 regulations, which have been so important for many of us. So greatly appreciate everything that you do and all that DOE brings to the table. So I have a very, very kind wife. So the other day, I realized not too long ago, maybe some of you have realized the same thing, that without these reading glasses, I can barely see anything at all. It's on the page in front of me. So the other day, I put on my reading glasses. These are sort of tortoise glasses. I have a pair of black reading glasses. I have reading glasses all over the house because I'm constantly losing them. I put on this pair of black reading glasses, and my wife says to me, "When you put on those reading glasses, you look kind of like Clark Kent." So I took off my reading glasses, and she looked at me like it would be a good time to go walk the dog. She's very kind. She was like, "Don't push your luck." So I may turn to my reading glasses, not because I think it makes me look like Clark Kent, but because it's difficult for me to see what I have on my notes in front of me here. So I suspect that most of us in the room here have spent a great deal of our time over the last several years talking about the intersection of water and energy. And certainly that's been the case in my program, and as Mike mentioned, in the underground injection control program, which I'm responsible for at EPA. I like to think if you're looking for the UIC program, just go to the intersection of water and energy, and that's where you'll find it. There's so many issues that cut across the two that we spend most of our time thinking about how we best navigate. And I think this has been a very dynamic time for most of us who work on water and energy for a couple of reasons, many of which Paula Gant referred to in terms of the tremendous growth of energy production, domestic energy production in the U.S., which has really been stunning. At least the numbers that I pulled off, which are probably now out of date, suggested that 84% of our country's energy needs in 2014 were met through domestic sources, and I suspect that it's more than that today. That's an increase of over 15% in just 8 years, so a tremendous growth of domestic energy production. And over the course of the same period of time, Secretary Teague mentioned the drought that we've had here in Oklahoma, and certainly we heard quite a bit about the drought in Texas. Interestingly, the way you described that your drought, for the time being, may be suspended, if not ended, when you talked about the intense rainfall. And probably many of us remember in Texas, we were hearing about the crushing drought in Texas until we turned on the television and watched cars floating down I-45, right? And so for your counterparts in the state of Texas, trying to manage through those challenges of long, crippling drought followed by intense rainfall, or if we think about Boulder, Colorado, and what they experienced in the fall of 2013 when they were in extended drought and then had a 1,000-year storm over the course of a 5-day period that wiped out all sorts of water resources in the area of Boulder. When it comes to water and energy, from our perspective in EPA and certainly in my program, it cannot be an either-or discussion. We can't be in the position of talking to communities about, well, you can choose either having robust energy development or you can choose having high water quality for your children to drink, drinking water quality. It has to be a discussion about both, right? And I think every community in the country expects that they're going to have access to reliable sources of energy that'll fuel the growth that we were talking about, as well as access to high quality drinking water and water resources that'll support the health of their kids and their families. And it really comes to us in this room and our counterparts across the country to figure out how we make that so. And I think in many cases, we've figured out a lot of that, and to think about how we make sure that that continues to be the case in the future. I'm going to talk about a few examples of from my program where I think we're really focused on those issues together. And there's some things that I probably won't talk about that if you have interest in, I'd be glad to address in the question and answer session. You know, another discussion that I had yesterday with one of my colleagues here who's at the meeting reminded me that it's hard to overestimate the impact that the decisions that EPA makes can have on people all across the country. So one of my colleagues told me yesterday that she was checking in at TSA at National Airport. And of course, those of us who work at EPA all have a federal ID. So she said, well, I have that handy. I'll pull out my federal ID and show it to the TSA agent to go through security. And you expect them to just take a look and say, all right, go ahead, this is good. And the TSA agent says, EPA? All right. Let me tell you a thing about EPA. EPA does not understand how, when water falls from the sky, it infiltrates into the ground in the Delmarva Peninsula. It does not go into the Chesapeake Bay. This is a TSA agent, right? I mean, you expect someone just to check you in and say, go ahead. This woman, of course, I wasn't there. Fortunately, she was able to get through security and onto the airplane. But this woman somehow looked at what EPA has done, things we've communicated, and it affects her in a personal way, right? Somehow she has a personal connection to what's happening in the Chesapeake Bay. And I think it's a good reminder for me that it's hard to overestimate how many people have a connection, important connection to the decisions we make at EPA, and that we have to stay mindful and as connected to all of you as we possibly can, and to people who live in your communities, to understand how the choices that we make impact life in communities all across the country. And that's been an important focus for Gina McCarthy as administrator. And she talks about making a difference in communities, trying to stay connected to what's happening in communities. And so I think it's an important part of our focus. So I'm going to talk about a few items that I think have been of interest to you, and then we'll have a chance to touch on some others if you want as we go forward in the rest of the session. So the first is Aquifer Exemptions, and a big thanks goes to the Groundwater Protection Council in the states and the energy sector, who's helped us work through some of these tough questions on aquifer exemptions. And I think you know this has been a very important issue in a number of states across the country. It really does sit right at the intersection of water and energy. And just a reminder that under the Safe Drinking Water Act, EPA has the regulatory responsibility to approve or disapprove of aquifer exemptions. And most of aquifer exemption decisions are pretty straightforward. The few that are more complex or controversial can be very difficult and time-consuming. And just to be clear, for those who may not be familiar, aquifer exemptions are tremendously important decisions. What an aquifer exemption says is that EPA is making the determination that the proposed exempted area is not and will not be used as a source of drinking water now or in the future. And aquifer exemptions can get pretty complicated when there are drinking water wells that are located nearby to the proposed exempted area. This is particularly the case in areas that have been stricken by drought. So we see this in California, where there's an ongoing effort to update aquifer exemptions there. We certainly saw it in parts of Texas, where there have been some contentious decisions, and other places in the country as well. We heard from a number of states that it just was tremendously frustrating at times where there was a complex aquifer exemption decision that was facing us. It was taking too long. It was holding up permits. It was difficult for the entity that was trying to move forward with energy production. What we did was got together with the Groundwater Protection Council in a number of key states and some of our regions to kind of hash out a process for aquifer exemptions to work, to try and make the process more predictable, make it go more quickly and in a consistent manner. And so there are a few tenets in the process we laid out that are captured in a memo that I wrote to our regional division directors. They talk about encouraging consultation with the state at the beginning of the process to avoid surprises. We developed a checklist with GWPC of information that's typically going to be expected to be provided in aquifer exemption, and facilitates documentation of the statement of basis for approving or denying an aquifer exemption, and encourages early elevation of disputes that avoid delays in resolution of an issue. So those are all really important process steps. Now, those of you who have been working on aquifer exemptions I suspect, are probably thinking that there's an important piece that's missing there. If you think about the issues that make aquifer exemption decisions simple or complicated, they're issues that relate to the presence of drinking water wells nearby the exempted area. And questions about, is that water being used now or will it be used in the future? We didn't really address that issue at all in this memo I wrote to the division directors, and I think it's something that we have to take on. I spoke with Mike Paik about this today and with Dale Kohler from the state of Texas, and I'll be reaching out to some others saying, you know, we got to make some progress on this. It can't be a process where people are really not clear about what constitutes current or future use. So that's an issue that we're going to continue to work on with the states, and we think that's going to help to advance efforts around aquifer exemptions, just to make sure it's as clear as possible so people know what to expect. Second area I want to touch on is Class 6. And Class 6 under the UIC rules, Class 6 is a well class designed for long-term sequestration of CO2. So it's all about, Class 6 is all about the safe long-term sequestration of CO2 in a manner that protects underground sources of drinking water. And within the Class 6 program, which is our most recent well class in the UIC program, we work to leverage regulatory flexibility in moving forward the permits that we have done. And there are 6 Class 6 permits to date that have been approved by EPA. 2 to Archer Daniels, Midland, and 4 to the Future Gen Alliance, all in the state of Illinois. And we continue to work with other permanent applicants and prospective applicants in Regions 7, 8, and 9 on projects in Kansas and Montana and California. So we think we've made some good initial progress on Class 6. But there is an issue underneath the umbrella of Class 6 that I know has been of concern to many in the oil and gas industry, and I wanted to address this here. And that has to do with the potential for transitioning of a well from Class 2 to Class 6, an EOR well from Class 2 to Class 6. So in April of this year, I issued a memo again to our regional division directors, which is really the primary means by which I can set national policy on issues like aquifer exemptions or Class 2 to 6, and to communicate that, make sure we're all on the same page across all the EPA's regions. This memo laid out a process that I think makes a lot of sense, and I think many of you gave us feedback that it made a lot of sense. But I want to lay out some of the key tenets of the Class 2 to 6 transition. And so we understand that CO2 storage associated with Class 2 enhanced oil and gas recovery wells is common. It's currently permitted under Class 2, and it occurs safely under that permit regime. Geologic storage of CO2 can be permitted under the Class 2 program. Use of anthropogenic CO2 in an EOR operation does not necessitate a Class 6 permit. Class 6 closure requirements are not required for Class 2 injection operations once they close. Enhanced recovery operations focused on oil and gas production can be managed under Class 2, and if oil and gas is no longer a significant aspect or a key factor if it's no longer a significant aspect in the operation, a key factor in considering whether a transition from 2 to 6 should occur is risk to underground storage of drinking water related to significant storage of CO2 in the reservoir, where the Class 2 regulations are unable to manage that risk. The Class 2 program director will have the relevant data related to risk to underground sources of drinking water, and I encourage the Class 2 and 6 directors to work together on these issues. And we understood also, and I stated in the closing the memo, that the best implementation strategy is to have both the Class 2 and Class 6 programs operated at the state level. So I think in laying out these principles for Class 2 to 6 transition, my purpose was to make sure it was perfectly clear to everyone that we expect the transition from Class 2 to 6 would be very rare, that the Class 2 program is up to, in almost every case, up to managing the issues related to long-term storage of CO2 that are related to a EOR operation. And hopefully that has given some comfort to the industry that you understand where we're headed on this. If not, I certainly want to hear about that. but hopefully that's helped to advance the discussion. Another issue I want to touch on very briefly, and then I'll wrap up here soon, Secretary. Another issue I want to touch on briefly is hydrofracking. And, I mentioned how fortunate we are to have Secretary Teague here in the state of Oklahoma. We're also tremendously fortunate to have Teresa Marks now with EPA. And many of you worked with Teresa in the state of Arkansas. Teresa retired from the great state of Arkansas, moved to Napa County, and then she got Napa County, California, that is. And then she got a call from the EPA saying, would you be willing to come help us on oil and gas and unconventional oil and gas development and hydraulic fracturing? And we are very fortunate that she said yes. And I suspect many of you feel that you are also very fortunate that she said yes. That someone who really understands on the ground how state program, energy and environment programs work is now advising, a senior advisor to the administrator on these issues. And Teresa's here, going to be here till Wednesday. She's sitting in the back over there, at least she was a little earlier. And I don't know of anybody who's more open and willing to talk to folks than Teresa Marks. So I hope you'll take advantage of the time that she has here. We have a couple of presentations related to the hydrofracking study that we recently completed. Jeff Frithson from EPA is here. Gene Briskin is also here. They'll both be presenting tomorrow. Our hydrofracking study looked very widely at potential risks to drinking water related to hydrofracking activities and concluded in large part that we haven't seen many impacts to drinking water. We see that there are practices that could be done poorly, which could threaten drinking water. And one of the activities that Secretary Teague and Teresa Marks have been working on together, along with a number of others of you, is looking for ways to ensure that the best practices that so many of you implement all the time in hydrofracking activities are those that are expanded across the entire country and by all the operators in the country. The last thing I want to touch on very briefly is induced seismicity. And I know this has been probably taken a lot of your time, Secretary Teague, right?
I'm really hoping this panel was not going to talk about earthquakes, but
So induced seismicity, I suspect, is something that for most of you needs no introduction. And we have been working with the states at EPA to protect underground sources of drinking water by reducing the potential for induced seismicity. And we had a great effort over the course of several years with a technical work group made up of state experts and EPA experts that put together a technical paper on induced seismicity. It was really about managing risks related to induced seismicity that was released earlier this year. And we have seen states like Oklahoma and Kansas who played such an important role in development of that, along with Texas and Arkansas, Utah and some others. Such an important role in developing that paper. We see you embrace many of those principles here within your states. Kansas gave another presentation today, I think, where they talked about some of the positive results they're seeing, where they're targeting reductions in injection volume and pressure and starting to see a reduction in seismic events, which we think is really tremendously exciting. And so we've been very pleased to be a part of that effort. And we're delighted that IOGCC and GWPC are picking up that mantle and carrying forward with their paper on induced seismicity, which, in our initial review just is very positive, and we're very appreciative of that work. I want to, before I close, mention and remind all of us about how important source water protection remains. And so much of the work that we do in our UIC program and in the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water as it relates to underground injection and working on energy issues is all about source water protection, protecting that groundwater resource for the future, and across the other parts of the program, protecting the surface water resources for the future. In 2014, we had the unfortunate opportunity to see what happens when two cities lose access to drinking water, Charleston, West Virginia, and Toledo, Ohio, for two completely different reasons, of course. Source water protection is the least expensive, most effective, most efficient means to protect sources of drinking water, and it's an issue that we want to continue to work on together. We have a presentation here on a new model we call DW Maps, which is a GIS-based system that will allow communities and states and utilities to be able to map and see visually potential sources of contamination, just to get a better understanding. Where are these things located? For example, it will allow someone to be able to see 24-hour travel time of a potential source, say a POTW that's releasing nutrients in a place like the Maumee River Basin. 24-hour travel time to get to an area like Toledo, Ohio. Just to begin to think about, what are the priority steps that folks should be taking? These are non-regulatory activities in most cases, but what are the priority steps folks ought to be taking to protect sources of drinking water? So with that, I'm going to stop and say thank you again so much for the opportunity to be here. It's really an honor to be with the two of you on this panel. It's an honor to be with all of you here in the audience. Thank you.
Okay, so Larry Bengals. Is it on now? There we go. Larry was after me already that we need to go faster, so I'll cut it down to one question, but I have to ask. And so this whole panel has been focused on both energy and water. And my comments specific to Oklahoma and so many other states are in the same boat with the drought and the impacts. The question revolves or goes around beneficial use of produced water. So from our perspective at the state, we think that there are certainly technological barriers and maybe opportunities, and I'm pointing at DOE as a tremendous R&D resource. There probably are also regulatory opportunities and barriers from EPA. So what do you see as opportunities and hurdles, and maybe more specifically, what do you think the states should be looking at as we try to figure out beneficial use of produced water?
Is this on now? Okay, great. So this is something that Secretary Moniz is particularly interested in and has directed us in the course of these conversations that he's been instigating across the department to think about not just how we reduce water use, but then once we've used it, how, particularly with produced water or recycled water, how we can use it in other sectors, whether it's through thermoelectric cooling or in agriculture or in other uses. And so this is certainly something that we expect a resource thrust to come out of the roundtables the Secretary is convening, but it's also something that at the department it requires us to think across different silos, different programs, whether it's our geothermal program, our energy conversion programs, our nuclear science programs, or oil and gas. And likewise, I think it's going to take the same sort of cross-cutting efforts through industry and at the state level to convene different users of energy and water, or different producers of energy and water, to think more comprehensively in a more integrated fashion about the challenge so that we can identify opportunities. So that's something we're trying to think about from a technology perspective and science perspective of the department, but I think at the state level it's going to be really important to get together interdisciplinary groups of stakeholders and scientists and interested parties to think about what are the solutions that are going to work for you. Because it's going to be very different. Just like our water uses and our water resources are very different across the country, our industrial bases are different, our energy conversion and use systems are very different. The solutions are going to be local because the challenges are going to be local, as are the opportunities. So finding ways to convene those conversations is going to be really, really important. Likewise, as you pointed out, and this is something Peter probably has a better handle on than I do, but this is going to present some really interesting regulatory and legal issues as you think about potential barriers to accelerating the use of produced water or used water, and things like this issue with the concern over the Class 2 to Class 6 well transition that weren't fully appreciated before we started going down this path. All the more important to have this interdisciplinary, integrated approach to the conversation, be identifying them up front so we can have smart legal minds helping us think through them as they unravel or unroll or whatever it's supposed to be. Thanks.
Thank you. So I agree with everything she said. But in addition to that,
No, not for you, in general.
I see, okay. In addition to that, I'm going to be participating in a water reuse panel on Wednesday morning, and I think a lot of the issues around produced water reuse are actually not that different from reuse of other sources of water. And one of the phrases that people commonly use when we're talking about water reuse is fit for purpose. Thinking about what is in the water, and what do you want to use it for? And what are the potential risks that are inherent in using that water for that purpose? So I think one of the important pieces is characterizing the water. What are the constituents in the water? Having an understanding about what constituents one might be more concerned about than others, and also having an understanding of what constituents the public might be concerned about more than others. There was a conversation this morning, a session earlier on risk communication. And so many of these issues are not merely scientific issues. If one approaches this as just a scientific problem, I think it'll be difficult to make the kind of progress that many want to on this. It has to be approached as a problem from the standpoint of what does the public think about this? What are potential threats that they perceive? Whether we view those threats as real or imagined, what do they perceive? And addressing those concerns, I think, is very important. I don't think there are actually significant barriers, regulatory barriers to produce water reuse, at least not within our program, but it will come down to the quality of the water, what are the constituents there, and making sure we can characterize. And trust us is not going to be an acceptable answer, probably, by the public.
Well, with that, I thank you very much, both of you, for being on this panel, and know you're going to be around at least the rest of the day. So if you rest of the folks have questions, certainly hit us up at the break. Thank you.